And if you have a chance, you can go into the chat and say who you are and hi, where you're coming from. We're always curious to know who's joining us on these giant conversations. We are going to use the chat mainly for discussion, and for questions for Dr. Green, we're going to use the Q&A. So Q&A are for questions for Rebecca, and the chat is for everyone else, sharing what you're doing. And we also are streaming this simultaneously to Facebook. So everybody that's joining us on Facebook, unfortunately, we're not able to see the same kind of interface there, but we have staff people that are watching the conversations there, and then they're going to post those things over into questions, so we can get questions from you as well. It's just kind of a two-step process. So far, though, we've got a few people coming in from Wood Lake, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Portland, Oregon, Bainbridge Island, Washington. Wow, I have relatives in Vashon. Lee Vining, San Diego, Salt Lake, Missouri, Birmingham. Uh-oh, we've got the echo again. Coloma, Los Angeles, Massachusetts. If I continue to keep having an echo, I might have to log back out and jump back in, but I'll do it at a point whenever you're talking, Rebecca.
Okay.
Oh, someone is claiming that they actually got to see a fisher one snowy season in Sequoia. Wow. Gene. That's pretty special. Again, everyone, as you're coming in, we're just going to give one more minute to make sure that everybody's in, their technology is working, and then we're about to get started. Let's see, I think so far we've got Massachusetts is maybe the furthest away.
There are fishers in Massachusetts, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I think they're in there now.
All right. Well, it is time, and I do hear my echo. I'm going to try to do a quick introduction, and then I'm going to duck out and let Rebecca do part of her presentation. Then I'll try to join back in, and hopefully that echo doesn't stay around. But welcome. My name is Daniel Hecker. I'm the Field Institute Director for Sequoia Parks Conservancy. We are the official nonprofit partner of Sequoia Kings Canyon National Parks, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers at Lake Cahuilla. As many people know, but some of you may not know, every national park has a partner organization like Sequoia Parks Conservancy, and we do a lot of things to support our park partners. The national park is responsible for so many different things, and what is wonderful about Sequoia Parks Conservancy is that we get to support their amazing work, and we get to support the visitors' experience in these special parks. I, as Field Institute Director, get to work with visitors that come and want to get different kinds of tours, that are interested in seeing special parts of our national park and connecting them with it. And another really interesting part of my job is that I get to interview fascinating people that work in the parks. And I would say that one of the most special aspects of working there is all of the amazing people, the research that they're doing, the science that they're deepening in order to both monitor our natural resources as well as make sure that we protect them for future generations. And one of the individuals that I first got to meet whenever I started was Rebecca Green, who was also somewhat new to the park. And Rebecca immediately stood out as someone that I wanted to talk to more about, not only because of her her role here in the park and all the kind of interesting things that she gets to do, but more specifically about one particular species that is especially special to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park, which is the Pacific fisher. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Rebecca Green and welcome you. Our format here is that we do a little bit of an interview and a presentation, and we're going to stop along the way so that people have an opportunity to ask questions. And we ask that everybody that does have a question, put it in the Q&A part if you're in Zoom. If you're in Facebook, you can put it in the comments and then somebody will move it over into the Q&A of Zoom. And for those of you in chat, we'll also be having people monitor the chat, but really it's the Q&A where we'd like all the questions for Dr. Rebecca Green to have those go. And then I will read them out to her at a couple different points along the way. And then we'll also finish up with another opportunity to ask more questions. So with all of that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rebecca Green. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. I know you've had a very busy couple of days. When I saw you earlier today, it looks like you were triaging a patient with multiple compound fractures and as part of your wilderness first aid training. So she goes right from that to giving a presentation on fishers. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thanks, Daniel, and I'm happy to be here. I can always get talked into talking about fishers because it's pretty fun species to talk about. So, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight, wherever you are. You know, it's later in some parts of the country than others, and I'm happy to share what I know about fishers in this area and what we're sort of doing in the parks to try to help facilitate their conservation. So, and I'll say a little bit more about myself. I'm going to partway through the talk, I'll give you a little more background on how I got into fishers, but I worked in the park here previously a number of years ago. My first paid wildlife job was here in Sequoia Kings Canyon doing small mammal surveys a number of years ago. And just more recently back in the park as a wildlife biologist, a little bit over a year. So yeah, so welcome, and I'll do a little bit of PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll have some opportunities for questions and stuff as well. Sound good? And hopefully everyone can see the presentation. So let's see. Oops. Well, now I'm having trouble forwarding that. Sorry, hold on just a second. Can't not have any technical difficulties, of course. It's well,
okay.
not forwarding.
It's always a little bit tricky sometimes doing these screen sharings as well as finding the right controls. Okay,
let's see. Let me try this again. See if I can put this into presentation mode and forward the slides at the same time. Nope. All right, we tried this right beforehand and it worked. Okay, here we go.
There you go.
We're on board now. Okay, so usually when people ask me what I work with and I say that I work with fishers, often the first thing that comes to anyone's mind is that they're like, oh yeah, I know that really neat bird that catches fish. And they're thinking of the kingfisher, but I'm like, no, that's not quite what I work with. Other people might think I actually, I'm a fisher person, actually out catching fish, but no, that's not correct. So then I usually try to clarify. Oh, here we go. By mentioning that it's a species that's similar to a martin, which is up here in this top corner. And often people are more familiar with purple martins over here on the right than they are with these martins. And then last but not least, the other species that often people think of that I'm talking about are marmots. So while these are all super neat species, they are not the fishers I'm referring to. And this is the fisher that I work with. It's a mesocarnivore, so meaning sort of a mid-sized carnivore in the weasel family. It relies on features of older forests, such as dense canopy cover and large old trees with decay. They use lots of different types of hiding spots, cavities in trees and hollow logs. As you can see here, they are excellent tree climbers. They have semi-retractable claws, so they can climb, but they can also sort of retract them a little bit as well. And they're just a pretty secretive and rare species. So they're not very there's not very many of them on the landscape, and they're pretty good at not being seen. So even a lot of people that have worked here in the park for many years have not necessarily seen one, even where they occur.
Oh, which is such a shame, because that is the cutest thing that I have ever seen.
So I want to definitely give a shout out to Duncan Mullen, who is working on our fish project right now, who got this picture. Is like one of my new favorites. So this is one of our female fishers. He has a little bit pointier face than the males do. So one of my goals in this talk is for everyone that doesn't already know how to identify a fisher. If you see one, you'll hopefully be able to after this talk. So this is a female fisher from up on the Sierra National Forest when I worked on a project up there. So overall, they're kind of a chocolate brown, but their head and shoulders can be lighter, like, you know, even a blonde color, kind of a grizzly color. It's variable by individuals and time of year. They have these proportionally short legs and a long body and a long tail. So they have that nice undulating movement of, you know, weasels and otters and those types of animals when they're moving. So when you see an animal run across the road, it's doing that as opposed to running like a canid or a fox. You know, that's a clue you might have a fisher or marten. Their fur looks a lot denser, or is a lot denser in winter, so they look big and fluffy, even though they're pretty skinny animals, as opposed to in the summer when their fur is a lot less dense. And then they have some unique undermarking. So I'm going to show a few other photos. So this top left is a female fisher. The one in the middle is a male fisher. You can see his head's a little bit broader. He happens to have a little bit darker fur. And then I'm pretty sure this is a younger fisher, maybe a juvenile. In the summer, you can see his coat's a lot thinner during our hot summers here. This is a female fisher in winter with a nice fluffy coat. And this is the actual same individual at night. And you can see how just the lighting can affect, you know, what the coloration looks like. And something most people don't get to see is these really neat markings on their underside, on the chest and groin area that can be sort of white or buffy colored. So really beautiful coats. And then these are some of the other animals in the Sierra Nevada that might look similar if you just see them briefly. So in particular, the marten up here in the top right has sort of a tan or almost sequoia colored coat in some cases, but they have this nice peachy to orangey throat patch. So if you see that, you definitely know it's a marten, not a fisher. You tend to have pointier ears, a little bit sharper face, a little bit proportionally, a smaller animal and proportionally shorter tail. We have several other species of weasels, long-tailed and short-tailed, that can also turn white in the winter. So if it's white, you know it's not a fisher. Mink are sometimes in the foothills, maybe a little bit more further north of here, but they can look similar in coloration. Then we have these two other neat animals, the ringtail, which has this nice ringed tail, but it's kind of similar in size to fisher, and the gray fox, which occurs kind of low. Both of these are more in the lower elevations, but overlap a lot with where the fishers occur. And hopefully everyone's seeing the screen and hearing me okay. If not, please let me know.
Yeah, your audio is kind of getting broken up a little bit, but I think that's just internet issues, so that's okay.
Okay, well, sorry about that. I'll try to speak a little closer to the computer in case that helps at all.
Yeah,
okay, so I'm going to go through. Okay, I'm going to go through 5 what I think are neat facts about fishers in the Sierra Nevada, and show you a few more pictures, and then I think we'll take a short break for some questions. So. One thing is that they have a really varied diet in this area compared to further north where they occur in Canada and eat a lot of snowshoe hares or porcupines. They are relying on squirrels, several different species, other small mammals, birds, berries, and even fungi. And they are carnivores, but obviously eat other things aside from just meat. But they can also become prey because of their size. They are susceptible to predation from mountain lions and bobcats in particular. Females give birth and care for young in tree cavities, but they can't make these tree cavities, which is, I think, a really interesting phenomenon. They're relying on decay and pileated woodpeckers and other factors to create those cavities in the forest. They usually just have 1 or 2 kits, only one time a year. Occasionally in this area, they'll have 3, but that's pretty unusual. And then last but not least, during spring, the females actually will move their kits from one den to the next, one by one. So as opposed to a bird that once it nests, it's kind of stuck there until the kits, or the chicks fledge. The females can actually move, and there's lots of speculation as to why they do that, but it's kind of a neat thing. So usually a female will use about 3 or 4 different hollow trees when she's rearing the young kits. And this look appears to get increasingly difficult as the season progresses, as I'll show you in a moment. So here's just a few photos, and we have a couple papers that are out for those of you that want to read more on this. This one just came out. Christy Pilgrim was the primary author on this, looking at diet using a metabarcoding technique from Fisher scat samples. And we were trying to tell if the Fisher diet changed pre and post tree mortality, which we did find that it did. But anyways, these are some of the things that the Fishers were eating. Douglas squirrels, these cute little Humboldt flying squirrels, gray squirrels. They're eating a lot more of these before like tree mortality occurred than post-tree mortality. Post-tree mortality, they're relying a lot more on berries, at least from the samples that we had in our study area at the time. But they'll also eat birds, quail, lizards, chipmunks, and fungi, like I mentioned before. Here's some of those predators. You know, and I'm a carnivore biologist, so I like all of these animals. But you know, it is unfortunate when one of your Fisher study animals, you know, gets attacked and killed by another larger animal. And when I was working up on the Sierra National Forest, we worked with IERC and Greta Wingert specifically to identify who these predators were. So we did, if we found a dead animal, one of our collared animals, we would do forensics, just like CSI shows, to try to identify who the predator was. And primarily it was these 2 species, occasionally coyotes. And then for my dissertation, this is one of my favorite parts of studying Fishers, is learning about the tree cavities that they're using for denning. So this is another paper if you're interested. I just pulled up some examples. In our neck of the woods, they use black oaks a lot. In some other parts of the country, they're using other hardwood species, and then they'll also use conifers. But black oaks are especially important around here. So these are just 3 different oak trees. I don't know how old these trees are because we don't core them, but clearly pretty old, large trees with lots of decay and hollows inside. And these are the cavity entrances that they were using. And just to not forget about the conifers, this is an old pine snag that had a pileated woodpecker hole. And we had, over the years, several different females using the same den. So these structures are really important for these animals out in the forest. And as a reminder, they can't make their own cavities, so they are relying on other animals and decay to happen. And then last two neat facts. One is the small litter size. So this was another thing I studied during my dissertation time, trying to figure out how many kits they had. And basically the bottom line is they usually have 1 or 2, occasionally 3. And this is my previous supervisor, Craig Thompson. We used 2 methods. He climbed trees, and so did some other folks to look in the cavity when the mom was gone to do a kit count. And then we also used remote cameras to try to catch those females when they were moving from den to den. And then I think, let's see. Yeah, so one of the last things that I just think is always fascinating is the females moving these kits, and just sort of the challenges that they must go through, and, you know, finding new trees, moving these kits from place to place, avoiding predators, you know, finding food in the meantime when they're not doing this. So here's some kits when they're pretty small, and you can see this female moving her kit, going head first down the tree. It looks pretty easy when they're small, but when they get bigger and their eyes get open, they can climb a little bit. It looks much more difficult. So I'm just going to show you an example of, this is one female moving her, this is from the Sierra National Forest again, moving her kit in early June. So you can see about what the size of those kits are at that point. So hopefully this video will work okay. So I'll give you a little background. So the cedar, this big cedar, which is over on the left, is the actual den tree. And then she just used this little oak as sort of a path going up and down the tree. And we had the video camera focused on that. So you might be able to hear some of the bird songs. in there. You can also, since this is moving day, she's sort of looking around, you know, making sure there's no predators nearby before she goes to get that kit. So here's the next little video, and you can see over here on the trunk, the mom and the kit, which can grip but not really climb, is going to be moving over there, so that you can see the small kit that's crying, and she's trying to pry him or her off of the trunk, get him down to the base of the tree, and it looks pretty difficult. So, and we have one more video. So here's the last one. So she's trying this again, trying a new technique to get him off the tree, and they sort of just end up tumbling down the tree. And we managed to get, we had one other camera set up at this site where we got the female chicks kind of exasperated. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing, but you know, it looked like a struggle to get that kit down the tree. And here it is. And then she took it, I think, around 500 meters away to another tree, you know, that she would stay in for another few weeks. So.
That's Rebecca. That's so interesting that they're like, why are Pacific fishers so uncoordinated when they're young like that? I mean, because like some chicks, they're immediately able to run around. I see the little baby quail doing that. Why are Pacific fishers such a handful?
I mean, that's a good question. I know fishers, like even compared to some related species like martins and some weasels, they have a longer period of development, and they stay with the moms longer. They'll stay with the moms, you know, into we think at minimum late August, and then I think for some it's longer into September or October. And I think they just have a lot to learn, and then also maybe you know, the females have to catch a lot of food to provide the nutrients for the kits, and so maybe that sort of limits, you know, how quickly they can also develop. But I kind of think of them at this age as sort of the middle school to early high school age, you know, where they're learning things, but you know, can't quite drive the car yet. So.
Well, Rebecca, do you have a time for a couple of questions?
Sure.
I'd ask everybody, if you do have a question for Rebecca, to put it in the Q&A if you're in Zoom, and if you're on Facebook, you can type it in the comments there, and then it'll get passed over. So some of the questions that have come in so far are Pacific, Lee's asking this, are Pacific fishers a subspecies distinct from others?
That's a good question. So I think the correct answer, at least for now, is no. Although there are different. I'm not a geneticist, so I'll preface it with that. But I've had friends that are geneticists, and the group in the Southern Sierra is pretty genetically distinct from other areas. So I almost wonder if at some point we may have, you know, Southern Sierra designated as a subspecies. It could be, but in our area, they've just been separated from other fishers for so long that's, you know, I think creating the genetic distinction. But the Pacific fisher part really refers to the whole like western coast area, Washington, Oregon, you know, potentially up into British Columbia, depending on how you want to interpret that. But I don't think they're technically considered a different subspecies from the rest, at least as of yet.
Okay.
Good question.
And then somebody else asks, why are they called fishers?
That is a good question. And I'm not sure I have 100% the correct answer, but from what I've read in the literature, when French and other fur trappers first came to North America, this was an animal that Native peoples were catching, and I think the French just didn't have a name for it because it was just a species they didn't normally catch. And something called a fichet, which I may not quite be pronouncing right, it was the pelt of the polecats that they would catch in France. So I think since they didn't quite have a name for it, that term was maybe used early on and sort of just got carried on. But they don't, I mean, they would probably eat fish if you handed them one, but they do not fish. They're, like otters or something like that. So it's a little bit of a misnomer, but.
Okay, and another question is, over how many years has your research taken place?
Oh my goodness.
Or is it
That
still going?
that implies how old I might be. So let's see. I mean, I did my master's project in 2002 to 2004. So 2002 is like my first official year probably studying the Fisher Martin group, and pretty much I've been involved with them in some way, ever since then. So.
All right, and following on the age question, I guess, is how long do fishers typically live?
Oh, that's also a good question. Well, I think they can. On the Kings River Fisher Project that I worked on with the Forest Service, our oldest fisher would have been 11, probably 12 by the time that project ended, and she was still alive. And we had a couple males that were up in the like 9 to 10 year range. I think if they survive their first year or two, which, juvenile animals, it's always hard for them to survive. But if they do that, I think they have the potential to live, 10 years or more. But there's a lot of hazards out there for them now, other predators. There's the impacts of rodenticide from illegal, marijuana cultivation on public lands. A lot of other things that are maybe causing them to die earlier than they would perhaps historically. So to answer that, I would say, most of them that I'm familiar with are living like 6 to 8 years, potentially could live longer without other hazards.
All right, and then another question is about elevation. How high are they where they're nesting?
It varies in the Southern Sierra and the areas that I am personally familiar with. Probably the core areas around, like 3,500. I'll talk in feet because I can't remember in meters right now, but 3,500 feet to like 6,500 feet is sort of like the main area. There might be situations where, a female might use a den a little bit higher or a little bit lower, but that also is roughly the range of where you typically find black oaks, interestingly. So.
All right, we do have a couple more questions, but I think some of them are going to get covered by your next section. So let's go ahead and keep going, and then we'll come back to these questions. Those of you that do have questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them. Thanks, Rebecca.
All right, sounds good. And I keep leaning back in my chair. I'll try to, I don't know, hopefully the sound is okay. Okay, so I'm not going to get into detail on this, but I thought some people might be interested in how I got interested in these elusive critters to start with. So I'm just going to give you the very brief, short version of this. So when I worked in Sequoia, Kings Canyon, a number of years ago, I just did a lot of giant forest. Of course, for anyone that visits the park, is a really spectacular place to go. And so I liked hiking the trails around that area quite a bit. And when I was out one day looking at a sequoia near a meadow, I saw one of these critters, a martin, Pacific martin, and these might at some point be called Sierra martins. But anyways, I just thought it was like the most fascinating critter, and it was sort of going in and out. This isn't the original martin, but this is the original sequoia, or two sequoias trees I saw. I was checking out this little nook and cranny and then climbed up the tree and then scampered off into the forest. So I went and looked it up, read about them, learned about them. And then next time I went out to this particular area, it was just random luck, but I saw a weasel. I don't know if it was probably a long-tailed weasel. So I don't know, it just sort of got hooked on the weasel species or weasel group. And then eventually saw, a fisher while working in the park. And so, so all of this combined with just spending time in the park kind of inspired me to go back to school and do graduate projects on both martin and fisher. And yeah, it was just sort of a chance encounters, and it's piqued my interest. So yeah, and I'll just keep going unless we want to take a break there.
No, I'd say, yeah, go ahead, because there are going to be some questions about fire. So this is good that you're talking about.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So, I could make a whole slideshow on why we should care about fishers, just because they're a neat, incredible species, well adapted to our forest, but they're also, my opinion is they're indicators of ecosystem integrity in sort of a mature and older forest. They have really large home ranges. They have a great need for trees that are old, large in diameter, have a lot of decay associated features. And then I think they're really, like, if they're still in an area, or if you're trying to manage forefishers, thinking about landscape connectivity, because they travel on the ground and need to travel through cover in both dispersal events and their daily lives. So I think that's just important when you're like trying to plan for a more resilient landscape in our area. So additionally, legally in 2020 in the Southern Sierra Nevada, this distinct population area was listed as an endangered species under the ESA. And then with changing landscape conditions, drought, tree mortality, and these large high intensity fires, these are all concerning, not just for fishers, but for the forest that they live in, the other species that use those areas, and the people that also enjoy going to these. So just as I could have probably put this earlier, but this is a distribution map of fisher. The hashed lines represent historic distribution, and the gray is a little out of date, but it more or less represents where fishers occur now. So you can see this isolated area, and Sequoia is within that of this Southern Sierra Nevada population that is listed under the ESA right now.
And Sequoia stands for Sequoia and Kings Canyon.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forget that not everyone is aware of that. Thank you. And then these are just a few, pictures for those of you that haven't seen some of this occurring. That we had a significant drought in the starting in 2012 and going for several years, and had a lot of conifer mortality associated with that, and that has also contributed to these large high intensity fires. So this is the little arm of Kings Canyon, and that's surrounded by National Forest Service land, and then in Sequoia National Park, this is the KMP complex fire, and the red represents the higher intensity burn areas. Green is lower intensity or unchanged. But this is just a picture of one of those higher intensity areas. So we're really dealing with major landscape change that we don't necessarily want in these areas. And so sort of looking through the fisher lens of how can we think about making this landscape more resilient and restoring areas where we can, I think provides a lot of opportunities. Plus, legally, in a lot of cases, we also need to be concerned about them. So we could stop there.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions about fisher movement. So one is do they travel very far from where they are born to when they transition to adulthood? Like how far do fishers move around? And maybe you could even answer a little bit of like, how would you know that?
Yeah, that is an interesting question, and it is kind of tough to answer because a lot of times we don't know who where the kit originated and then where it ended up. So when we do trapping for these animals to identify individuals, it's usually in the fall and winter, because we don't want to separate the moms from the kits when they're vulnerable. And genetically in the Southern Sierra Nevada, it's very difficult. Like even if we catch a kit and we catch its mom, we can't necessarily say with certainty, like this mom belongs, or this cat belongs to this mom, because of there's not a lot of variability in the population down here. And there might be techniques that are improving for that over time. So anyways, by the time we catch an animal, it may already be somewhat dispersing from where it started. Years ago, I worked up on the Hoopa Reservation for Sean Matthews, and he and others were pit tagging kits at the den, so they could, when they caught them in the fall and put collars on them, they could identify, they knew who the mom was. And so they did have some animals that, stayed kind of moved in right next to the mom, especially some of the females, but a lot of the males, just took off for long distances, some of which we saw again and some of which we didn't. So I didn't really answer the question. It's a good question, but it's a hard one to answer with, a large sample size. So.
And then kind of along with that, you're talking about sample sizes. Like the question is, how many are there in the Sierra? Do you have an idea of how many fisher there are?
Oh,
Have you counted them?
no, it's another really good and it's an important question. There have been some estimates sort of based on the amount of habitat. I'm not going to be able to remember this off the top of my head, but from the Spencer et al. Paper from a number of years ago, it seemed like there was at least habitat and likelihood that, there was maybe in the ballpark of like 200-ish adults, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. There's a lot of habitat loss or massive change to the habitat has occurred in recent years, so that number could be less. But it would be great to like get a real number that's based on data from this area, which we don't really have in hand. We have that more for like isolated areas where we've been able to study them. So.
And I think you've already talked about this a little bit, but just to ask the question, again, it's the impact of the recent fires on fishers. We figure that there must have been some kind of impact. And I think one of the main things that you coming to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park is doing is really trying to understand the impact of those fires. So what are you learning so far in your research?
Well, we're going to go into that in just a minute, like the two sort of main approaches that we're
I'm sorry, I
did. I jumped the gun. That's all right. It's a good question, but while I have this fire map up, I'll just say that, some of the areas that burned, at high intensity or areas that were previously, presumably pretty good habitat for fishers. Some cases we had data, pre-fire data, in some cases we did not. But some of the questions we have are, are they using, we sort of suspect they're not using the high intensity areas very much because there's not much canopy cover. A lot of the trees with hollows probably burned up. There's not a lot of food. There's not a lot of canopy cover. So what we don't know so much about is like the areas of like low to moderate intensity burn, like how quickly they might come back in and use those areas. And some of those are more like a prescribed fire, that we would like to see on the landscape. That's more like what natural conditions would have been in the past. So we're really just trying to learn, and also to just, is our assumption that they're not moving through these high intensity areas or not using them extensively? Is that true?
Okay, well then there are lots of questions on the research. So I'll let you get to the research because this is the most interesting part for me.
Okay. All right. So again, I tried to just narrow this down a little bit. So what are some of the things that we're doing to study and conserve fishers here in Sequoia Kings Canyon and in the surrounding area? We tried to think about the whole area, the whole Southern Sierra. What's within the park is important, but also the population as a whole. So improving our understanding of where they occur in and around Sequoia Kings Canyon, their habitat use, especially relative to recent fire footprints. And then incorporating this information into restoration planning and fuels reduction plans that we would like to see implemented to ultimately protect the giant sequoias that we all care about and other live forest, that's home for fishers and many other species in these areas. So we're sort of taking two approaches, one of which is using remote cameras out in the forest. We have a sampling design I'm not going to go into, but so we put cameras out in the forest with some bait and lure, and hope that we detect one of these animals, which is a fisher at these sites. Let's see. And these are also great because you can leave them out for a long time. It's not like when you're trapping animals, if you can't get to your camera, 5 days later or whenever you're trying to get there, it's you can just leave it for a while and get back to it when you have a chance. So which with all of the many the road issues and the burned areas and all that, cameras have been a really great tool. So anyways, this is now quiz time for people. Hopefully you're all paying attention during the fisher and other species ID early on. So here's an example of one of the photos we might get. So hopefully you don't think this is a fisher. Can see a little bit of orange on the throat, a little bit shorter tail, a little bit smaller animal. So this is a martin. And here's an example. The nighttime photos, you know, some of the photos aren't as crystal clear as others, but in this one we can see that we have a ringed tail, but it's got these little feet and just not quite raccoon-like. So this is a ringtail. They also have, if they look at the camera, they have really large eyes. They're almost entirely nocturnal. So you can see from that in the camera. And then at this same site, hopefully you're seeing that this animal has a little bit longer legs, a little bit different body shape, not as long. And so this is our gray fox. And both of these species overlap with fisher in habitat use to some extent. And then last but not least, these are the ones that it's fun to see all the other animals, but we were really hoping to see these guys, the fishers. And this might be a male. He's got a little bit bigger feet. So anyway, so these cameras tell us about where they occur in the parks, and then we can get, you know, somewhat into habitat use and occurrence. And when I was alluding to the fact that we don't only care about the fishers in the parks, like we're going to be contributing some of this data to other analyses that are going to be for the whole southern Sierra, you know, looking at occupancy and habitat use. And so, yeah, we're focused on the parks, but at the same time also contributing to the bigger picture. And then radio collars is the other main tool that we're using. And we're using a combination of, kind of depending on the situation, VHF small collars, which as a reminder, I'm supposed to use my prop. This is a little stuffed martin, but this is the size of the VHF collar that we have put on some of the female fishers. The drawback of these are a little smaller, but the drawback is they don't collect their own data. We have to go out in the field, and like this particular, you know, female, we would have to find her den tree using telemetry and actual people in the field. And then some of the GPS collars will collect the data on board, and we have to then go get that later. And we're very careful about, we picked the smallest size GPS collars that we could get. So this is the size of the female collar, and this is the size of the male, the larger male collar. And then we also make a handmade breakaway that will, this is one that was actually on a fisher. It will decay over time and fall off. So if we never catch the animal again, we feel, you know, we want it to stay on long enough to learn something, but we don't want it to have it forever. So we try to recatch them and take the collars off, but at the same time, we feel certain that it will drop off at some point if we can't get to it. So anyway, so we do have to catch the animals, and we're very careful. We have a very strict protocol about handling them. We've been following, wearing masks, doing everything we can to keep the animals safe. Then we go look for them using telemetry, and we're doing a lot of coordinating with Yosemite National Park. They also have a fisher project going on, so we do a lot of communicating and sharing of information. And so, yeah, we either can go out and find den trees by using these handheld devices, or in some cases, we try to get the GPS data back from some of the GPS collars. And this is raw data, so just take this with a grain of salt. I haven't had a chance to collect all the data or analyze it yet, but this is sort of showing the darker green as the unburned or unchanged or lightly burned areas. Light green is low intensity burn, yellow is sort of moderate, and red is higher intensity. So these are 15-minute data from one male fisher. And even without doing an analysis, you can see that, well, maybe occasionally they go into these higher severity burns, but maybe just like running through it. I don't know exactly what this animal was doing in these cases, but you can see they're spending a lot more time, or he's spending a lot more time in the lighter green, and then the bulk of his time, these are points all stacked up, whereas he was probably resting down in or foraging down in these live forests. So that's the kind of information we're trying to get to better understand, how they're using this landscape. Yeah, so that's the fishery stuff. Any questions associated with that we want to?
Yeah, you bet. Again, everybody, if you can put questions in the Q&A section, we'll try to get to them. You have a lot though, Rebecca, so we're going to have to be starting to enter the lightning round here of things. One is about, has this type of nesting behavior been observed in other populations of fishers, or does it seem to be exclusive to this population in the Sierra?
Oh, no, this is like fishers everywhere that they occur, which is only in North America and only in certain areas. They they might use different types of trees based on what's available, but they pretty much all female fishers use hollows in trees. They might occasionally use a log, or maybe late in the season as the kits get bigger, they might use a rock pile or some other type of structure. But they always need something that's going to provide thermal and physical protection for the kits. And they have delayed implantation, and so they give birth same time every year, like no matter what. It's not like nesting birds where they can see if there's enough food or wait for the right weather. They're gonna give birth. And so I think they already know where most of the trees with the hollows are on the landscape in their home range, before they start denning. But yeah, it's pretty, I think it's just the habitat. The actual tree species are different throughout the range, but the behavior is very similar. So.
That behavior of several dens, moving them around, and as the kits grow, you kind of changing spots.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another question is about DNA testing. So what DNA testing method are you using to try to detect lineages?
Well, I can't really speak to the lineage question because, like I said, I'm not a geneticist, but I have two really great colleagues, Christy Pilgrim, who's at Rocky Mountain Research Station, and Jody Tucker, who used to run the carnivore monitoring program for the Forest Service in the Sierra, and she's now in Montana with Rocky Mountain Research Station. So all of the genetic information that we collect at captures, or if we're doing hair snares or something like that, I send to them and they process, and then they figure out what it means. And I'm oversimplifying that a little bit, but they really are the genetics experts, and so it's really great to have colleagues that's their specialty. So I can't really answer the lineage question, but they might be able to at some point.
We have other experts that work on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
A question about do you lose many cameras or research equipment from the latest fires? And if so, how do we help recover from those losses?
That's a great question. We did lose some cameras during the KMP. So actually, just prior to the KMP, we had started a study. I was still working with the Forest Service, and so we were partnering with the park, and it was a joint Park Service, Forest Service project, and we were actually more focused on the Rough Fire, which is just north of sort of the Grant Grove area, because we wanted to learn about fishers and burned areas. And then literally while we had cameras out in the fall, the KMP happened. So we had some cameras out within the KMP. Some of them, some firefighters recovered for us, so we didn't lose those entirely. And then some other ones burned up. And then some others we weren't able to recover till like the next year, just due to access issues. And some of those don't function anymore so well because they were out a little bit too long. So anyways, we were fortunate. We could have lost a lot more than we did, I guess.
And actually, to follow up on that and another question is, how are these projects funded? Is SPC funding, or is it federal, something else entirely? Essentially, how can citizens donate to support this? So actually, I'm not going to put that to you. I'll answer that myself, because Sequoia Parks Conservancy is supporting this sort of research that Rebecca and others are doing. And that's part of the wonderful aspect of being a nonprofit partner, is that we can go out and fundraise for special causes that have an immediate need that maybe the Park Service isn't able to directly address because of its funding cycles and the way things are set up. So SPC, working with the park, recognized that this was something really important that we needed to understand. And so we have set up a donation where you can make a donation specifically to support the Pacific Fisher research. And at the end of this talk, we'll talk more about that. But I really appreciate that question, because it really gets to the heart of what can we all do about it. And this is one way that we can certainly support it. Another question that we have here is is the fisher the only animal receiving this amount of intense study, or are there other animals that you're studying like this in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks?
That's another great question. So we have a number of either species that are listed or species that we are concerned about in the parks. I think the fisher has gotten a lot more attention recently because of the listing decision and sort of legal requirements, and maybe some more funds were available than might have been otherwise. But we also are working with some Forest Service partners to learn about spotted owls, California spotted owls in the parks. California Department of Fish and Wildlife, CDFW, is the primary group that's focused on learning about bighorn sheep, Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep, which also occur mostly almost like the complete opposite of where the fishers occur in the parks. And that takes different techniques and different skill set, to work with those animals. There's two others. Well, Sierra Nevada red fox, which I have some pictures of. Maybe I'll go ahead.
Yeah, why don't you share some of the interesting things that have been going on recently?
Yeah, so this is another species that was also recently listed, and also sort of recently, in the last decade, detections have started to occur closer and closer to Sequoia and Kings Canyon. And last year, I believe, was the first actual, verifiable detections, through photo or scat in Kings Canyon in a very long time, depending on which records you believe, but something like in the order of 100 years. And so we do have another project starting with them, hopefully this fall, if we can, road access, continues. And then there are other species like the mountain yellow-legged frog. That's Danny Boyano and Laura Van Rankin, sort of, they're the people working with those species, but we've been doing a lot with those species. So yeah, there's a number of species. I think fishers, it takes a lot of sort of intense and specific methods to study them, but also the benefit with the camera stations is that we are learning about fishers, but we are also learning about their prey and all of the carnivore community. So I think that's a real sort of bonus with that type of approach. So hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, did you want to go on to talk about some of the other interesting things that you're seeing in the Sierras?
Yeah, so I'll just say that there have been many challenges in the last couple of years, and then the fires, and then the snow this winter. But one good thing about the snow is there's two carnivores that occur up in the alpine area that the snow may actually be really benefiting. And so here's the Sierra Nevada red fox in the three different color phases or color morphs that they have. And so this is another species that detections have gradually continued further south, and we are should be involved in a project this fall. Hopefully we can get the field work done to put some cameras out in more alpine areas for this species. And this is just a little diagram that I borrowed from the Lassen National Park website on sort of identifying the Sierra Nevada red fox relative to gray fox that I mentioned earlier, or coyotes that can also be up in the high elevation area. And then as many of you, if you're interested in fishers, you may have also heard about the recent wolverine detections, one in Yosemite, and then I think the other two, probably all the same individual is what the thought is right now on the Inyo National Forest. And so this picture on the left is actually from Denali, so this is not one of the recent detections, but just to give you an idea of what they look like. And wolverines are a close relative of the fisher, actually. So, but this was a picture taken by someone in Yosemite of that recent wolverine. So it's just exciting, some of these animals that have not been actually technically recorded in the southern Sierra Nevada for a very long time. Maybe making it back down this way, which is really great.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful to end on a note of hope, because many of these things that we talk about are, the reduction and the decreasing population. So it's really wonderful to see some new faces in the area, and a sign that they might be moving into the area for good.
Yep.
I wanted to ask a couple of last questions. I've been saving these because Andy has asked a couple of really interesting questions that I just wanted to share with you, Rebecca, and then I'll let you also do your acknowledgments there. But you know, it's really just what about fishers is most alluring, charming, interesting, and just keeps you working so hard to learn more and share more information about them.
Wow, that's tough to answer, but I mean, well, I'll say so I have my husband is a birder, and I think there's, you know, when he goes out to like look for birds, which I also love doing, like, you know, you can almost always find birds, maybe not the ones you're most interested in, but you know, you can go out, you can look for birds, and you can find some birds, and but with fishers, I think part of the appeal is like it just takes so much patience. You know, you're not going to be able to see them very often. They're very secretive. Even when we're doing telemetry, you know, we don't see them regularly. Or at the camera stations, you might check the camera and they're there, but you don't see them physically. So I think it's part of sort of the mystery of the species that is very appealing. Like once you're very interested in them, you know, and finding the ways to learn about them, finding, you know, refining the methods to study them, you know, in ways that also, you know, don't have a impact. And then it's just such a conservation, you know, just, you know, I don't really want to think about a world where there's not fishers in the Southern Sierra. You know, that's just seems like they're an important part of the ecosystem here, you know, along with many other species. But yeah, I think just kind of their elusive nature, and they're just, yeah, just intriguing. So
I agree, and I really thank you for taking the time to share all of the different pieces of this intriguing animal of the Sierra, and also just spending all those long hours doing the research, huddled in cold spots, getting in the remote areas, working with all of your colleagues, and pushing so hard to bring that science forward and to bring our understanding forward. Because as you pointed out, this isn't just the Pacific fisher that we care about. This is the whole ecosystem. And I just really appreciate all the work that you're doing. I'm gonna pop up my screen for just a second here. Rebecca, was there anything more that you wanted to say?
no, other than just to acknowledge, you know, like this is not the work of one person. Like this is many people over many years, you know, so many field staff. We've got some really great field staff on our crew right now, Duncan Mullen and Mariah Hellbrant, who's back for another season, and many other people over the years. And then just many different funding sources from different agencies, and including Sequoia Parks Conservancy. So yeah, it really takes a big team effort to study an animal like this.
All right, I'm going to share my screen.
Oh, should I stop sharing? Sorry.
That's okay. I can do it.
Okay.
And hit present. So again, Pacific fisher. Sequoia Parks Conservancy is the nonprofit, and we are funded by the people that support Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. And you might be one of them. It would be really helpful for us, and it would be really helpful for the research that we're supporting. We have a very ambitious goal of raising funds for the Pacific fisher that will help continue our conservation efforts to better understand the impacts of the Pacific fisher, especially the fires that have recently gone through. This helps pay for the collars, the cameras, the technicians, and all the different components of it. So if you're able to, you can go in the chat. They're dropping a link about how to make a donation. You can also go to our website at sequoiaparksconservancy.org, and also by checks. We do it the old school way too. Other things coming up, we have a Dark Sky Festival on September 9th. We're going to be taking a break with Giant Conversations this summer because it is really starting to get busy in the parks. We love seeing everybody there. The giant forest is now open to the public. You do have to come in through the Grant Grove section, but they're hopeful to have the road from Three Rivers open at the beginning of July. There's also exciting things with the Visitor Center, and the Dark Sky Festival is September 9th. A great opportunity to celebrate the nighttime in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. Thank you all again for your time. Thank you, especially Rebecca. I know you were working so hard, and she squeezed us in because she really wants to get the word out about the Pacific Fisher. And so I really thank you so much for taking your time. Thanks all of you for joining us today. If you weren't able to make all of it, if we weren't able to get all of your questions, we encourage you to connect with us, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and we will try to get to your questions there as well. Also, we can put you in touch with Dr. Green, and if you have more technical questions, or we can maybe get some of her resources in terms of publications if you want to do some nice reading to educate yourself even further.
Great. Thanks
right.
for inviting me, Daniel, and thanks for everyone attending.
Oh, thank you so much. Everyone, have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.